So I had someone write in this week and ask about how they can improve their chromatic scale playing, especially when they're descending through a chromatic scale that goes down on a single string. So they're having some difficulties with that. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So they're working out of my technique book, and in my technique book there's some chromatic scales and variations on chromatic scales, and of course a ton of other scale activities as well. But today we'll just take a look at this one chromatic scale in E, the basic one, and we'll just talk about that question that follower had, which was the problems with descending down a single string in the scale. So let's just play the scale really quickly here. Okay, before we talk specifically about the shift, let's just talk about our technique in general, right? So when we're practicing this, we need to make sure that each finger placement is balanced and that our left hand alignment is all organized. Without that organization and basic technique level, then the shift, of course, will be very difficult. So we want to make sure that we're playing relatively close to the frets, that our fingers are curved at each joint in the finger, and that we're playing on our actual fingertips, not on the pads of our fingers. And for a lot of people, that means not going like this and throwing the wrist out, but straightening that wrist and getting the fingers to curve. If your palm is close to the guitar and we curve our fingers and play on our fingertips, then it'll force curvature out of our fingers and we can have a pretty balanced hand position. And then as you progress through the scale, you just want to keep that balanced hand position. So for a lot of people, that means just slow practice with careful placement of each finger. As you progress through the scale, keep your fingers over top and aligned, over top of the strings and the frets that they will play on, and just aligned the whole time, even when they're not in use. When you shift up here, keep your first finger on the string as a guide finger. That way you don't take your finger off and get discombobulated or something. Keep your first finger down as a guide finger. Just make sure you're not like putting pressure on the finger and doing a slide or something like that. You release the pressure and slide up the string with no glissando happening. When you descend through the scale, I think a lot of people miss this aspect. When they shift, they often will shift to the fourth finger, but they don't use any guide finger. So on your descending scale here, there's no reason to take your first finger off. You can use the first finger as a guide finger during the descending shift. That should help a little bit with alignment of your hand, because instead of taking your hand off and it kind of going out of position or something, you can keep it aligned with all your fingers over the fret, and then the hand is just moving that shape down, right? You can see when I place that finger, everything is aligned. All the fingers are over top of their potential next frets, which really helps because it just minimizes any kind of rethinking or any fidgeting of your fingers. Everything is just right in its place, and then all you have to do is do a small movement just down into the string. Very, very small, very minimalist. And you might want to practice just doing the actual movement. So you just create that little exercise for yourself. And you stop right on that note, because that's probably the hardest note to get. But then you're not just focused on this finger, you're focused on what the other fingers are doing, because everything must be aligned. You want everything to be organized. then you're relatively home free, hopefully. So there's so many different factors that we could talk about in terms of technique. Of course, make sure you've built up a foundation of technique. So in my book, that means going back to the beginning of the left hand alignment exercises and just making sure that you're doing some left hand alignment exercises that will ensure that your left hand technique is organized. If you're trying to do scales with shifts in them, but you haven't organized your position playing yet, just the one finger per fret kind of position playing, then of course the scale will be too difficult. You must treat this in a progressive way where you build up a foundation of technique in simple exercises, and then you progress to more difficult ones. And I've tried to lay my book out like that. So you start with very simple alignment exercises and little finger just like placement exercises. And then we start doing those like horizontally, you know, just to really build a foundation of alignment in your left hand. And then eventually when we get to scales and we start shifting, then hopefully all the alignment issues are taken care of, and all we focus on is like little things like guide fingers and shifts and just like the thing that's new. We're not dealing with any kind of, you know, bad technique along the way, because why would you have to think of it like a teacher. Like, why would a teacher want to talk to you about your hand position during a scale? Your hand position should already have been worked out when you did some exercises. And it's okay if it's not, but you should consider going back to some basic alignment exercises and just really solidifying them before you do the shift. And then when you do the shift, hopefully all you have to do is your hand just moves your fingers around. Your fingers are so organized that your hand just moves it around and they just kind of button push as they go, right? In a musical way, of course. But everything always stays aligned. So that's the goal, and so when you're practicing this scale and you're working on the descending shift, do the things I advise you to do, but at the same time, just make sure that you have that foundation. And so when you shift, for example, that your thumb is shifting with your hand, you know, it's not, when you shift up, it's not lagging behind. All those like things that we should have taken care of previously will have already been dealt with by the time you get to like a 3-octave chromatic scale.